Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
British people don't trust the media and think most newspapers just turn out fake news. That's what Jeremy Corbyn has claimed as he set out his ideas for a shake-up of the news industry. The Labour leader told the Edinburgh Television Festival he wanted to reduce the power of media bosses and owners and increase diversity, as he called on the BBC to publish the social class data for its workforce. Our Scotland correspondent Kieran Jenkins reports.
In an auditorium in Edinburgh, the lanyard-wearing classes of TV world would eventually look up from their smartphones to be lectured on the media by a man who's often had a frosty relationship with it.
Thank you very much.
It was time, said Jeremy Corbyn, for some home truths.
When it comes to news and current affairs, which are so absolutely vital and essential for a democratic society, I believe our media, in many cases, is failing.
But journalism, said Mr Corbyn, is vital.
Too often we take journalism and journalists for granted. At their best, journalists challenge unaccountable power and expose things that the rich and powerful would rather keep hidden from the rest of us.
Remember that as you watch this.
Do you honestly believe that Britain is better off outside of the EU?
Tuesday at a Labour press call.
I've been told I can only ask you one question, so I would very much like you to answer it.
We were restricted to just one question with the Labour leader.
Why can't you say if we'd be better off outside? Surely as Prime Minister you'd want to do what was right for this country, what would make us more prosperous.
I want Britain to be as well off as possible in any circumstances.
Today, Mr Corbyn proposed a tax on tech giants like Netflix to fund a new digital version of the BBC, as he called the corporation to be more open about the social class of people who work for it. The BBC wouldn't comment, but pointed to the wealth of data on the social background of its workers it already publishes. A recent study for Channel 4 looked at the social makeup of a number of broadcasters by asking employees about their parents' occupations. In the top category were the children of CEOs and stockbrokers, but also teachers and nurses. The middle category included plumbers, taxi drivers and hairdressers, and the bottom category featured shop assistants, cleaners and the unemployed. Only 9% of Channel 4 employees identified as working class on this basis, compared with 27% at the BBC.
The statistics really speak for themselves, and I think lay bare quite the extent to which the TV industry is sort of dominated by the privileged in this country. All of those main broadcasters, their workforces are made up 60 to 70% of people from middle class, professional and managerial backgrounds.
Channel 4 says it's taking action to improve socio-economic diversity and ensure the organisation is open to people from all backgrounds. Athena Kublenu is a North London comedian.
Is TV too posh?
Yes. Oh yeah, definitely.
She says class can be a blind spot for TV executives, especially in respect of ethnic diversity.
If you are a person and you are like from a minority ethnic group, you have a different life experience if your parents are already, if they're lawyers, accountants, doctors, then if your parents were, in my experience, a lady. So you have, like I said, intersectionality is the thing. You have to look at that intersection. Okay, who are you putting in that position? Are they challenging the status quo?
Lecture over, Scotland visit over, with Mr Corbyn saying parts of the press and their billionaire owners were a travesty. Some challenging questions from a man who knows all about them.
Thank you.
Throughout the Brexit debate, what many have called culture wars have raged, with partisans using their favoured newspapers or websites to fight their campaign. Working in a place like this, we've got quite used to critiques from Leavers, Remainers, left and right. Well, today, Jeremy Corbyn, speaking at the Edinburgh TV Festival, gave his take on what's good and bad about the media scene and how a Labour government might address that. There were a whole raft of prescriptions, but also some pretty harsh criticism of what he called a failing media here.
The British press is the least trusted in Europe, including non-EU countries like North Macedonia and Serbia. Just let that sink in for a moment, that there is this degree of scepticism and mistrust of so many newspaper titles. The owners and editors of most of our country's newspapers have dragged down standards so far that their hard-working journalists are simply not trusted by the public, and that is a travesty.
Well, we're joined now by the Deputy Editor of the Sunday Times, Sarah Baxter, and Owen Jones, left-wing activist and commentator who writes for The Guardian. Sarah Baxter, if I can start with you. I mean, Jeremy Corbyn's got a point, hasn't he, in terms of the erosion of trust, the public feeling that...
There's a lot of division in politics today, but the lack of trust, I mean, people are feeling mistrustful of politicians. The answer is not to have unelected politicians, even if... So this is contested space. But one of the reasons, I think, is that
the type of data he suggested about public... particularly, I've got to say, in newspapers, tabloid press.
That's just nonsense. What it means is that readers of one newspaper, say the fans of Owen Jones's column, don't trust the Mail and the Sun, and the Mail and the Sun readers don't trust Owen Jones and his paper. I don't think there's a fundamental crisis of trust. In fact, the newspaper group that I work for, The Times, and I'm going to include the Sunday Times on this, came out as the most trusted newspaper in Britain. And I'm very proud of that.
Owen.
Britain has the least trust of any European nation, as you just pointed out, in journalism. And not only that, but in this country, journalists are less trusted than estate agents, who I have to say are not the most popular of professions in this country. No, clearly there's a massive crisis in trust. Look, what the problem with the media is twofold. Firstly, it is the most socially exclusive profession other than medicine, according to the government's own study. According to the Sutton Trust, very respected independent organisation, over half of the top journalists are privately educated. Just 7% go to a private school in this country. And whilst 90% of us are comp educated, less than a fifth of the top journalists are. And what that means is the way that if you like, issues are reported on, the priority given to them, is seen through the eyes of some of those privileged people in Britain. The other issue, though, and we hear this all the time, the free press. Of course, we don't have a country where the press is run by the government. We're not North Korea, not the most ambitious place to start. Instead, most of the press in this country is run by a very small group of media moguls like Rupert Murdoch,
Quickly, I want to just come back on that. Isn't that traditional MSM, to use the dread phrase, withering on the vine? I mean, in the way politics is debated, isn't social media and some of the other new media, you know, it might be Squawk Box, it might be things you find quite amenable. They're growing, aren't they? And newspaper circulations are plunging.
Yes, that's absolutely.
We're in a golden age of more diversity and more opinion than ever across the spectrum.
I have to say that's probably one of the most ludicrous propositions I've ever heard. Look, overwhelmingly in the last general election, the press backed the Conservative Party. Even though 40% backed of the people voted for Labour, 42% voted Tory. And not only that, let's look at the issues.
This is not the point at all. We're talking about a bid by Jeremy Corbyn to take control of a media that he doesn't like.
Can I just say...
This has nothing to do with what you're talking about.
Well, following up on Sarah's point,
I need to correct that.
He talks about digital Digital Media Corporation. He talks about different ways, for example, of appointing the BBC Trust or deciding on the licence fee. All quite interesting. But who are these people? Who's he suggesting should be making these key decisions now?
I think an important part of journalism is to correct inaccuracies, as we've just heard. What their proposals are to remove the government's right to appoint members of the BBC's board, to appoint an independent body to oversee the licence fee.
Someone like you?
No. But the whole point is to stop the government appointing people. No. For example, at the moment, the charter has to be renewed every 10 years. That gives the government a whip hand over the BBC. To abolish that we should extend freedom of information requests so government ministers can't veto them, and that businesses which are running public service in this country, they're no longer exempt. This is about reducing government control and having media independence.
Well, that's absolute rubbish. This is a big Trojan horse which has a few nice proposals like extending freedom of information, which I'm all for, as a means of inserting placemen. into the control of the media. Who is going to run this so-called fund when you've taxed the tech giants? I'm all in favour of taxing the tech giants, by the way, but why give the money to the BBC, which already has a monopoly on news provision?
On the taxing the tech giants, it's almost a motherhood and apple pie thing, but it's like nailing a jelly to a wall, isn't it? I mean, they'll declare their taxes in Luxembourg, wherever they have to.
Yeah. Why can't we have it back as a taxpayer?
I think that's a defeatist attitude towards taxation. Look, I mean, what partly these plans are about doing are reducing the burden on poorer households by asking rich businesses who have increasing sway over journalism to pay a bit of money.
Do you think let me come in here.
We're almost out. Yeah, last word. Sorry, Sarah Baxter, quickly. Sorry, we're almost out of time.
Do you think the poorer people that you're talking about would prefer the tech giants to be taxed and pay for the failing high streets they can't go and shop at? Or give money to the BBC, which is already well provided for?
In France and Belgium, there are already agreements with Google, for example, to fund independent journalism, which is in crisis. But as I've said, the press in this country is run by media moguls, which is why, even though overwhelmingly people support public ownership of utilities, that's not reflected in the press.
And you support public ownership of the press?
No, I don't support that. You can't just make stuff up. Come on.
A vibrant debate. Owen Jones, Sarah Baxter, thank you both very much, and I'm sorry I had to cut it short.